This isn't a video about some ancient esoteric spiritual teaching, but rather, this is a video about information. Information is this word that we throw around every day. We currently live within the information age, right? But what do we mean when we say that? What is information exactly? Well, today we're going to talk about it and explore some ideas that take several wacky turns. And by the end of this video, hopefully you will be able to see how this concept of information, how understanding it plays a vital role to your own personal growth and development, your own spiritual orientation within the cosmos, and understanding your own personal psychology. And it all centers around this one word: information. But what is it? Before we can tackle information, you have to start at the beginning. What is information comprised of? Information is comprised of data. Then that begs the question of, well, what is data? Simply put, data is things. Data is things upon things upon things. It's just meaningless things. Meaningless being the operative term here. It is a set of facts that have no inherent meaning on their own. And what information is reason applied to data. It is to look at a data set and to see how different things are correlated. Or in other words, it is to simply look at data and be able to distill or discern patterns. All information is pattern. They are synonymous. And once you can make this switch from information to pattern, you can sort of leave behind this aesthetic that we associate with the term information. I know many people, when they hear this term, they think, 0 and 1 type of binary computer logic. But once you view it as pattern, you can better digest some of the things that I'm going to talk about. I can say something like, all of reality is information, without you assuming I'm claiming that we are in some sort of computer simulation, because all of reality is information, or in other words, all of reality is pattern. Reality is just patterns upon patterns upon patterns. It is this endless interconcatenation of patterns. Science, our pride and glory, is simply the cataloging of patterns. In fact, what we consider to be the totality of human understanding has just been us cataloging patterns. If you look at the scientific method, it starts off with you making an observation, which is simply you noticing a pattern. In fact, the human mind can only understand pattern because understanding in and of itself is pattern. I don't know if you've ever done an IQ assessment or an IQ test, but when you look at the questions, they are centered around your ability to recognize patterns. Everything that you see and experience is a pattern. It can be something that is inert and doesn't move, like your t-shirt. It can be something that is alive and has motion, like flowers. Everything is pattern on some fundamental level. And if you've watched my content before, you perhaps have heard me speak on this. But this is where the video takes its initial kooky turn. The interesting thing about patterns is there appears to be no end in sight to them. And what I mean by that is they appear to endlessly permutate, and information can be broken down, twisted, and contorted in all sorts of various ways. Or you can view it as this: how many different ways can you describe or view something? For example, if you take a t-shirt, some jeans, and some shoes, How many patterns are there just within those three items? You can say that they are all clothes. That's a pattern. You can say that they all have a color. That's another pattern. They are all comprised of fabric. That's another pattern. Just between these three objects, there is this entire assortment of pattern that you can use to try and describe what you are looking at. But the funny thing is, to another perceiver, there is the possibility for an entirely different set of patterns to be observed. I'm pretty sure that to a gorilla, tennis shoes aren't tennis shoes. It is some other pattern entirely. A t-shirt isn't something that you put on to wear, but maybe it's something you use as a tool. Maybe it's something that you wipe your butt with. If you were some sort of alien mind or observer, what would be the difference to you between pheromones and music? You could crudely look at it and simply surmise that they are both some sort of frequency that is emitted by an organism that changes or alters or influences the behavior of nearby perceivers. And it is only music to us because we exist within a context to where it makes that sort of specific sense to us. So information is sort of like you taking various data points and putting them in a box and labeling it. Sort of like when you are moving out of your house or your apartment. But the interesting thing is the contents of any box can simultaneously be a part of several different boxes, and the boxes that they are in are also a part of all kinds of different boxes. And it is so interconcatenated to the point where you have this overwhelming net. It's sort of like, that toy, the Russian doll, where you put one doll inside of another doll inside of another doll. It just keeps going on like that for as far as you can perceive. And this net of patterns that we call reality is so complicated that once we reach a particular threshold, we enter into something called chaos. And as I mentioned in my previous video, which I'll have on the screen, chaos is simply a point to where we can no longer apprehend pattern. The factors are too dynamic. It is too overwhelming. So human understanding turns off because human understanding is the apprehension of pattern. And when there are too many of them, or a particular instance of data is behaving in a way that we cannot assign a pattern to, it appears to us as chaotic, unpredictable. But ultimately, as we have discovered, these unpredictable data points, this unpredictable data, this static that we call chaos, is patterned. It is just a pattern that we are not able to see. So this implies that we are embedded in all kinds of various patterns that we are completely unaware of. Or at the very least, they are patterns that we cannot quote unquote officially confirm as such. Things that come to mind is astrology, for example. Does the rotation of celestial bodies have some sort of correlation with human behavior, human thinking, human psychology? The quote-unquote official answer is no. It's some sort of pseudoscience, but many people would argue otherwise. When you walk out into a field of flowers and you can see the various insects moving around, you can hear the various chirps of birds. Are those birds simply spouting out mating calls and talking to each other? Or is it some sort of different type of genetic information moving around? Or in other words, the same way that all life forms are just a combination of varying patterns that make up some sort of totality that we call an organism. Is the planet like that on some level? People call this Gaia, or the living planet. Kind of how the Amazon rainforest is considered to be the quote-unquote lungs of the planet. it? Is there something to that? Just how many patterns are there? How many types of patterns are there that we simply don't have the perspective to see? Any more than the cells in your body understand that they are a part of a thinking human being that can do math and watch YouTube videos. The cells within your body, they are alive. They make decisions. It's just the way that we understand the decisions that they make can solely be from our own perspective. There's something called chemotaxis, which is how cells respond to certain chemical factors in their environment. Simply put, if there is something introduced within the environment of a cell that it wants, it goes towards it. It desires it. But to us, we just say that it is automatically responding to some sort of chemical factor in the environment because that's all it can ever be to us. But we do the same thing. Don't you enjoy a nice juicy steak? If someone offered it to you, you would accept it. But what a steak is, what information is, it can be anything to anyone. To you, a steak is a juicy, delicious meal. To a vegan, it's a disgusting animal carcass. To some sort of alien perceiver, they would probably view it as some sort of chemical exchange the same way we view a cell. This is what I mean when I say that information can endlessly permutate. And all patterns are connected to other patterns. One of the more famous proponents of chaos theory was the butterfly effect. I'm sure many of you have heard of it. This idea that anything that occurs, no matter how small, somehow impacts the totality of the system. If we live in some sort of deterministic system, which many people believe that we do, that has to be true on some level. But the way that we get away with not addressing many of these things is through this term negligible. You know, when you're rounding off to decimal points, you can keep going essentially forever, but there is a convenient cutoff that we all place on things, and we say that we're going to care about it up until this point, because what happens after this doesn't really impact us, and that is true. But if you ever try to specifically dissect where one pattern ends and another begins, you won't be able to do so. I talk about this all the time. This is sort of like this left brain logical 0 and 1 type of viewpoint versus this right brain mushiness, and that what we call thingness is actually just an arbitration of our own mind and convenience. But in actuality, all things are connected. When does your liver turn into your kidney? When do you stop being a group of organs working together, and when do you start being a human being? When does 1 second turn into 2 seconds? In between all of these, there is this infinite gap, these infinite amount of decimal points that you can never reach the end of. And when you look at physics, for example, with quantum entanglement and spooky action at a distance, things are correlated in all kinds of ways that we don't fully understand. And with that in mind, perhaps things such as astrology, for example, perhaps the rotation of the celestial bodies impacts human psychology in some sort of way, or at the very least, there is some sort of correlation between them. As a result, reality, it's very similar to the concept of fractals. I bring this up all the time, and this comparison is normally received very tongue-in-cheek from many people because, you know, the hippie types, the psychedelic types, they all tout this same thing. But when you really look at things with an open mind, it appears to operate in a similar way, endlessly unfolding, interconnected in this infinite way. Even when you look at something like history, when you look at you, where you stand in this whole thing, you are an echo of what preceded you and a shadow of what precedes you. And there is this unfolding that is occurring, with each pattern having its own unique identity while simultaneously being the same as everything else. That's why we have this whole expression of history repeats, or at the very least, if history doesn't repeat, then it often rhymes. That for whatever reason, the way that things play out, it is this echoing out, sort of like when you take two mirrors and you hold them in front of each other and they reflect off of each other for infinity, for forever. And I say all of this to say that at any given moment, all around you, there are all sorts of patterns that are going on. It's only a question of which ones are you able to see or choose to see. And the patterns that you are able to see, they can take you to some pretty wacky and far out places. I'm sure we know people that believe all kinds of crazy things. Perhaps people believe that I believe all kinds of crazy things. One thing that comes to mind is schizophrenia. You might hear someone with schizophrenia say something. I use this example all the time. They might say Julius Caesar caused the 2008 housing market crash. We just look at them like they've completely lost it. But perhaps similar to the same way that a butterfly flapping its wings impacts the totality of the whole, those two things are linked. In fact, an astute historian, they can walk you all the way up into the point where those two things meet. Julius Caesar did this, which led to this, which led to this, which led to this, which led to America, which led to, the stock market. We can see the context laid out. But I think it's just the bold assertion of saying that this person directly caused this incident thousands of years later. This is the thing that it turns people off, And schizophrenics, they are pretty much people who have this circuit in their brain for pattern recognition. It is just gone haywire, and they see patterns everywhere because patterns are everywhere. This is the point that people leave out. They just see patterns that most people can't see, or they assume that it's this word that I used before, negligible, inert. There is no correlation. It doesn't impact us. And as a result, we just say that it's all occurring within their head. It's some sort of delusion within their mind. And pivoting off of this is where the video takes its next far out turn. Where exactly is information? Once you try and assign a location to information, you are met with an interesting dilemma to where no matter which way you go, which fork in the road you choose to go down, you end up in some sort of Alice in Wonderland type scenario. I'll give you an example. If I wrote a math equation on a piece of paper and then I lit that paper on fire, where did that information go? If you are a pure materialist, you would say that the paper, the ink, or the lead from the pencil, all of that was preserved within the combustion of the flame in accordance with the laws of conservation of mass and energy. And that is all fine and well, but similar to the laws of conservation of mass and energy, there is another principle. It isn't a law, but rather an assumption within science that information is conserved, just like mass and energy. So you're left with this interesting situation. You could make probably the more scientific claim that no, you're misunderstanding this term information, and the paper, the lead from the pencil that is on the paper, all of that is considered information that is conserved when the paper is on fire, when it combusts. This would be a more materialist, scientific style argument. But if you stand on that side of the fence, then you would simultaneously be saying that Information takes place within the mind of the observer. And I use math as an example, but it could be any information. It could be the weather forecast for next week. Here's a little thought experiment for you to better understand this scenario. If you took a piece of paper and wrote a math equation like before, but you placed it inside of a plastic bottle and threw it inside of the ocean, does that bottle contain the information of the equation? There are two options. You can say that the bottle only contains a piece of paper with lead on its surface, and it isn't until another human being opens that bottle and sees that there's a math equation on it that it actually becomes information. You would be saying that information only takes place within the mind of the observer. Or you could say that within the bottle, there is a paper with information on it, which then you would have to eventually conclude that ideas have substance. You can take ideas and put them on paper, which would really force you to reevaluate your stance on just how real is the imagination. And believe it or not, there is all kinds of research going on into this. If you actually research these physics papers, I mean, it seems like straight up schizophrenic nonsense, but it's legit science. It is quite fascinating, this reality that we all occupy. And there are people who stand on both sides of this. There are people that believe that reality is mind. Neville Goddard is rising in popularity, and you see this wave of manifesting, people doing affirmations, that sort of thing, that people believe that somehow, some way, mind impacts reality. And for example, within this Christian creation myth, the way that reality is often said to have started in many theologies, there is some sort of chaoticness, some sort of void, abyss, that is given meaning. Or in other words, you could view it that there is all of this meaningless data that one day consciousness applied meaning over it. When this character of God within Genesis created the cosmos, when he said, "Let there be light," and he made the firmament, he was pretty much creating reality with his mind. He took a sea of raw chaotic data and turned it into information. And that our situation in this whole grand scheme is something similar to that. And then there is the other side. This is, pretty much Platonic thinking, which the West was built off of. This Platonic realm of ideas where pretty much ideas have form. They are real. They are things. Your imagination is real. But things such as math, for example, they exist in some other plane. This is when you start to see people talking about transcendent realms, transcendent planes. You start to talk about theology and things like that. But where I stand on all of this is probably a bit more far out and kooky. What I believe lies somewhere near the middle, and it's pretty tricky to explain, so bear with me. I don't believe that it is a transcendent, some sort of separate transcendent realm per se. And I also don't believe that this is all going on inside of our head, that reality is mind. Because when you ask someone to manifest $1 million, they can never seem to do so. Ultimately, I do believe that reality is mind, but instead of mind, I use the term consciousness because I don't want this to get confused for mind like you and I have, this human mind, brain, whatever you want to call it. Reality is consciousness, and consciousness is transcendent. This transcendent realm that the Platonists believe is separate from us is actually us, and we are creating this reality. And it's so easy to take what I'm saying and misconstrue it if you can't read between the lines. People often go on some sort of manic power trip when they think these kinds of things. It's not, when I say we, I don't mean you and me. And when I say create, I don't mean that it's something we are actively doing. The best way I can describe it, and I feel like the best way we are able to conceptualize this as human beings, is via the archetype of the artist. I talk about this all the time on my channel, and I'll have the videos up displayed on the screen. If you are an artist, let's say a writer for simplicity's sake, and you decide to write a story, what happens? What exactly transpires? If you write down on a piece of paper that Roger went to the store and bought a sandwich, in this world that you have just created, Roger will go to the store and buy a sandwich. And the reason why that is happening is because you will it to be so. And that world is your consciousness. This is why I am such a huge advocate for the imagination and artistry. And ultimately, I believe what I'm doing here on this channel is some sort of art, because I feel that the artist, the imagination, creativity is the key to figuring out exactly what's going on here. The secret doesn't lie in quarks and cracking open these subatomic particles. It lies within this concept of the imagination. That when you write a story, this world you are creating is made up of your consciousness. Consciousness is the fuel. It is the very substance of everything that it is made up of. And you can write all sorts of explanations on the constituents of this reality as you see fit. You can say, I'm going to create this world, and there's going to be these atoms and these quarks and all of these various things. But eventually, if someone were to crack open all of these various layers that you have set up, if they dug to the very fabric of this reality that they are in, they would find themselves floating around in your imagination. And as you write this story, the ideas are flowing from your mind, and it is giving life to what's occurring on the page. And to us, this looks like some sort of transcendent realm that is coming into contact with this one. But it's not like this world is separate from you per se. I don't know if you have ever participated in some sort of art, some sort of creative outlet, but for example, recently, the creator of Hello Kitty, I'm sure you all have heard of it. She recently came out and said that Hello Kitty isn't a cat and how it's a little girl. And she started to name all of the interest of this character or of this girl. Because to the creator of Hello Kitty, it isn't a character. It is a real entity. Their life essence is poured into these characters. And anyone who's ever written a story understands what I'm talking about, that when you're writing it, you actually become the character. That's what makes it a convincing character. And something like this is happening to us on this plane, that whatever you want to call it, some sort of factor is bleeding into this domain that we all occupy, that we all call reality. Some factor is making all of this happen. And right now, we are in the portion of the story called human history, humanity. Or in other words, consciousness is this. It is the thing that makes the story unfold. Consciousness isn't human. It is just human right now. This isn't to be confused that consciousness is all things, but the human animal, the human species, we appear to be where the pencil is currently writing right now, that we have the ability to cause the next big change. In the sense of writing a story, we would be the current main character. And people call this anthropomorphic thinking, but it exists for a reason. That at one point it was cells, then it was flowers, then it was the dinosaurs. And right now it appears to be us, but it won't always be this way. In fact, I believe that my viewpoint is the least anthropomorphic. That if you want to call this factor God, I don't think that it is anything like us, but rather we are like it. And what it actually is, it is the set, the mythological set that contains all other sets. And we are some minor subset of it. And once you finally figure all of this out, you finally have permission to be human and to enjoy your own unique life and experience, because at the end of the day, that's all you were ever meant to be. And there's nothing wrong with that. And this idea that you were ever meant to be anything else, perhaps this has something to do with, this whole Luciferian impulse, this Luciferian archetype, this light bringer, this ego. But perhaps that is the subject of another video. This is probably my longest video yet. So if you made it to the end, thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Like the video, comment. My Patreon got canceled, so I won't be promoting Patreon anymore. And I still have the videos that were uploaded. So I think I'm going to make some sort of membership on this channel and find a way to share this content with you guys. So until next time, y'all have a blessed day.